So last time we talked about the scope managing part, uh, and we talked about the governance part of the scope management, basically the how factor of the scope management in the plan scope management part. And I think we finished this class in the collect requirements, a pretty easy one with the various tools and techniques that is available to you to collect the requirements and get people talk, your stakeholders talk about their requirements. So today, let's try to finish the theory part in the first half. We talk about of defining the scope. So once you have collected the requirements from your stakeholders, then we are in the process of defining the project scope and the product scope itself, so that you can actually get it validated by the stakeholders or the customer for the customer, so that that will be your defined scope for the project. So as usual, this process also has certain inputs and some tools and techniques to get it defined out and the output. So to talk about when you're trying to define the scope, the key inputs will obviously will be the scope management plan, which will again define the how factor of how you expect the scope to get defined and monitored, and any changes we discussed last time, the governance part of the scope management. The project charter, as we discussed in class 1 and class 2, in class 2 I think, basically will give you the high level description of the characteristics of the product and even the project. So two different things we discussed last time, the project and the product. It will give you the high level what you call the requirements or the scope of the project. So looking at the charter, you as a project management who is playing the project management role can get an idea of the high level project description and the product characteristics of the product that the customer wants, or the other division and the stakeholder wants. In the collect requirement, we last time when we discussed documentation of the requirements together with the requirement traceability matrix, who said what and who required that, the features, and for what's the business case for that feature. So the requirement documentation will be again the key input out of all this for defining the proper scope of the project. Then again, you're bounded by the organization process assets, the policies, procedures of your organization, and also basically the lessons learned from previous projects or of similar projects. If you can remember, we did a case study. Last time we did discuss the Procter & Gamble case study. I mean, they took a lot of lessons learned from previous assignments of similar assignments when defining this, when going into the current for their major upgrade. So the lesson learned and from previous projects will be also a key consideration when defining the scope. Need not to be the same customer, but in your experience, the lessons learned that you as a project manager in the previous projects, if you're going to do telecom projects, you're going to a new telecom projects, whatever gained in your experience in previous telecom projects will come handy in defining the scope properly. So when defining the scope, basically it's the it's expert judgment. I mean, basically you might be taking subject matter experts to it. Maybe you are implementing a ERP system, And when you're defining the scope with all the customer requirements, bit and pieces of the customer requirements that has been given to you, already collected by the previous process. So now you're juggling with it and to come with a proper scope of the project. So you'll be tapping any expert advisory in consultancy role, or even in subject matter experts. Say you're doing a core banking product, and you're doing a core banking project. I mean, basically you may be taking the subject matter experts into consideration to find out what is the best practice. Although the customer requires some awkward practice, is it that the best practice, and what value addition that you can offer to your customer in defining the scope, and especially refining the scope. Uh, and any sometimes you might tangle up with professional associations or technical associations, any of your industry, and to understand what is the best practice to the customer that is required, or what is the best practice for a particular process. And sometimes you might go into the extent of hiring consultants that is required for you to get the know-how of the missing domain knowledge that is required for you to define a proper scope for your project. And or you might tap other business units, like the we discussed once, the enterprise risk management unit, or who deals with some specialized work of your organization, so that their domain expertise will come into handy when defining the scope. So uh, um, whatever means, once the expert judgment, once you take with all together the collective expert judgment of this is the defined scope of the project, this is how the business process has to get tangled up with your customer and the stakeholders. So you're basically you're translating. If it is a product, basically you're translating the high level product description that you have gained in the charter, or in the previous processes, into more tangible deliverables. So you're breaking down into more narrowed, tangible, what do you call it, a more descriptive product scope. And so you'll be breaking down the product, into more detailed requirements, and trying to get more narrowed down or more specific on the requirements. And system analysis, basically analyzing the various options available. The requirement analysis, the value engineering, or the value analysis, what's the value addition that you can give into the product, as an organization or as a third party system provider. So all these analysis will be done in order for you to define a more refined product scope as well as a project scope. Right. So obviously the alternative identification, your customer will say, no, this is the way to do, and he will think this is the world best practice, but maybe not. That is not the correct way of doing things. Especially we find when you go to implement accounting systems, or any other ERP systems, we find our customers generally do not do the best practice, but it will come as a requirement, because basically they will define it as a requirement because that is what they are currently has been doing for a decade, or doing for many years. So, but it's our duty as a project manager, or as an organization, to correct him and guide him to the best practice and that is available. Maybe the way the business process that has been mapped in your ERP system may be the best, the most the best way of doing such a function. So so it's alternative identification. Maybe the customer might not like the way that is defined in the ERP system. So how you can trade it off, and so you will have to discuss with your stakeholders and come to a middle point, and come to an agreeable point. And this is how a certain business process will be done and mapped in the ERP system. Or sometimes you might do a tweaking to your ERP system, a small customized change to incorporate certain requirements that the customer is really adamant on it and requesting for it. So as to tools like brainstorming, lateral thinking, group thinking, analysis of alternatives, facilitated workshops. We show the product to the customer first. Usually in ERP systems implementation, there are facilitated workshops that is conducted. We usually show the product to the customer so that they can visualize it and they can map their business requirements into the product. And so there are, especially BAs who are here in the class would understand that, there are a lot of discussions that take place at business analyst level, and you try to compromise and come to a common understanding of a particular business process, how it should be mapped in a particular system to be get delivered. Right. So, so the output will be the project scope, which will include the product scope itself. The project scope is a larger area where other areas of the project is also involved, and also which we also include as a sub scope of the product, exact functionality that to get delivered to the customer, and details of the deliverables. Basically, you might define the acceptance criteria for the product, such as the uptimes or concurrent connections that is required for if it is a e-commerce site. So whatever some product criteria, product acceptance criteria might get predefined at this stage itself. And then the project deliverables, everybody is clear about the project deliverables, what is to get delivered end of the day. Exclusions, you might come across with a customer, especially the BAs. You can hear me, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Exclusions, you might discuss with the customers the exclusions, the scope exclusions. Okay, we will not cover this part of under this project. So they sometimes certain things, maybe the customer originally thinks that should be included in the ERP system, but you might try to convince and exclude them so that you come across a concrete list of project exclusions, the constraints, the bound, and there can be technical constraints or functional constraints that certain things cannot be done within the ERP system that is going to get implemented, especially if it is a off-the-shelf product. So any project constraints will be, or the product constraints will get defined. Sometimes, obviously, many assumptions will be there in the project, in the scoping. So you try to get agreed with the customer the assumptions that is there in the project. So the scope statement basically that sometimes, not sometimes, we get what you call get the customer signature on it or the consent on it of the scope statement, is actually provides a common understanding of the scope among the stakeholders. So that will be the prime document that get a common understanding for among the various stakeholders that is there in the project. And as I told you, there will be explicit scope exclusion. So everybody's clear that these areas is not going to get delivered under this project, and so there is no ambiguity in that, and there is no later discrepancies or later conflicts that can avoid certain conflicts that will get arised later. In this process of defining the scope, again, sometimes you might fetch new stakeholders, and you might have to, as a project manager, you might have to get update your stakeholder register. We cover stakeholders, how to handle stakeholders in a later class, but then for the moment you might come across new stakeholders, that is with new requirements when you're trying to refine the scope. So your stakeholder register can be getting updated. Your requirement documentation, once again, there can be amendments to your requirement documentation. I mean, now we are trying to compromise, and now we are trying to compromise certain things and come to a middle point. So your requirement documentations will start changing. The traceability matrices will start changing. I mean, basically, you sometimes new stuff will come in, and certain stuffs will go out as a since you're compromising certain things, and so the requirement traceability matrix, who said what, will start getting changed. So, so we started our journey with the project charter, with high level information, and we now try to end up with a project scope statement with a more detailed description. So the project charter will as we discussed earlier, I mean, basically it will have some 360-degree view of a high level of the entire project. So that it will contain, we discussed earlier also in previous classes, a bit of high level requirements, a bit of a project risks, a bit of a key stakeholder list, and not the comprehensive. Obviously, nothing is comprehensive at the project charter level since we are at the initial stage. A bit of some process of how things get approvals, some project exit criterias, and who is assigned to the project, the authorities of the project manager sponsor. So this is almost at the high level, but then now we are ending up with a project scope statement, which is more detailed, which is more progressively elaborated. That means things go on now. It has got more elaborated and detailed out. Here it will clearly say these are the deliverables. This will be these are your prime acceptance criteria that UAT will be signed off. These are your project exclusions. Yes, obviously certain risk factors also have been considered when you're defining your project scope statement, but it is more into more into scoping, whereas charter will bit of a high level 360 degree. I mean, it would tap certain many areas at the charter level at the initial stage.